Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Financial Tides. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the financial mistakes to avoid. I'm joined with my co-host today, John Perillo, certified financial planner. And today, we're going to start with talking about the failure to budget. So, what are some of the important factors of creating and sticking to a budget as the foundation for good financial management?
Well, I like to call it the roadmap, right? It's not in concrete, it's not in stone, but it's a roadmap, and it kind of tells you when you're getting out of control. Like for me, I felt like for a couple months this year I was out of control. I took a breather. I looked back and said these were all planned projects and they're out of the way, and it's going to mean my budget's going to be lower next year. But, budget is not a destination, it's a journey. So, you constantly you put a budget down on paper, you look at it, you see how you did, and you adjust. And, that first budget is so important in your life because you start putting down the little things that you forget about. If you don't have a written budget, you forget about haircuts and you forget about $5 Starbucks coffees and things like that. So that's what's good about having a budget. And then, far too many people lose track of their spending, as I said, and they set unrealistic goals when they're budgeting. They set unrealistic goals. They quit too soon at budgeting, and they really don't understand what a budget is. It's not concrete. Again, it's a roadmap, just like if you're driving, 6 hours on a road trip, you plan your stops along the way. I'm going to stop here for the bathroom. I'm going to stop here for gas. Oops, you had to go to the bathroom sooner. Oops, the gas ran out quicker. You make a stop. So that's the purpose of the budget in a nutshell. Is just
Yeah,
that.
and I
Yeah.
think tying into that, there's a lot of consequences that we see that come up from the failure to budget part, which I think the biggest one is not reaching your milestones. If you're going about your day, you're just spending kind of willy-nilly, the thing that gets neglected is always savings. It's not, hey, I'm gonna spend less on eating out this month, or I'm gonna spend less on coffee. It always ends up being savings that gets cut short, which makes it really hard to get to your savings goals of where you need to be to reach some of those milestones that you're really looking to achieve. And then the next one is you have an increased chance of landing in debt if you're overspending, especially on a credit card where you don't see the money coming out of your account. It grows, and then you take a peek at it and you're like, whoa, that's more than the money that's actually in my savings. You can end up in debt and then increased numbers of debt, which we talk a lot about debt in a another podcast with credit scores, but that can lead to having a high credit usage and hurting your credit score. So, if you're interested in learning more about that, we have a separate podcast there, but you don't want to hurt your credit score by racking up debt. So, making sure you're in a budget and following that budget becomes really important so you don't fall into some of these consequences. So,
Yeah. And
um,
go ahead,
go ahead.
Ted. I'm sorry to step on you. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say some of the benefits of tracking that income really starts with identifying what your spending habits are and knowing where it's spending. So if you're the type of person that's a big morning coffee drinker, you stop and get a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts on your way to work. It's something that you can establish as a habit and know and account for. Whereas if you're just going month to month and you're doing those things, you don't really know what your habits are, where some of the money is going. And it kind of can seem like you're running out of the money that you have for savings and other goals pretty quickly. So.
I agree because my iced grande Americano with an extra shot is now 4.45. I throw another 50 cents in the hat for the baristas for showing up to work. I'm at $5. And if you do that 3 times a week, do the math, that's $60. You order two Uber Eats to work during the week at 15 each. You're at 200 a month, 2,500 bucks a year just on that. Now, if you account for that, like you said, and you can afford it, that's great. But if you didn't account for it, it's little things like that that you get to the end of the year and say, why am I always broke? So and then you neglect putting money aside to yourself first. So and that which putting money aside for you to yourself first probably leads us to the emergency fund conversation, Taylor.
Yeah, and I think just piggybacking off of what you said, if you're not tracking your expenses, then you have a Netflix subscription or a Peacock subscription that you took the free trial, you forgot you signed up for it, you watched the one thing you wanted to watch, but never went in and canceled it out. And now you're paying month over month for something that you forgot you even had. You rarely use it, and you're just wasting funds there. So, but going back to the emergency fund, I think that this one kind of hits home with me because the first time I ever really needed an emergency fund and had to lean on it was this year. And I think that I had an unexpected injury in lacrosse right after I planned a whole engagement and proposal. So bought a ring and everything that I had saved up for, but then the knee injury happened in lacrosse. So my extra savings had gone towards the ring, and then my knee surgery, all the medical expenses piled up, and I think that it really resonated with me that having that emergency fund, not having to put it on a credit card, was something that really saved me because I think all the interest would have really piled up. But John, kind of share us a little bit more about why. I know that I shared my story of how it resonated with me, but why it's kind of a non-negotiable for us.
The emergency fund's non-negotiable. And Taylor, by the way, Taylor has good insurance, but the deductibles and other things that you take to keep your premiums down really can chew you up.
Yeah.
But Fidelity did a study a few years ago, and when they first did the study, and I found it fascinating, they said 40% of Americans don't have $500 for an auto repair or a dental bill. And now every year I look at that Fidelity study that comes out, and now we're in the 50+% range. So 50+% of Americans don't have that 500 bucks. So this is a non-starter for us. We absolutely insist that everybody have an emergency fund. Your portfolio with us can have some money in there as an emergency fund if you want. We can put it in something safe. But for the most part, we don't want that 35 or 45-year-old to raid a 401k or a retirement account or an IRA for 500 bucks for a plane ticket to Cabo for the weekend, you know? So you got to have that fund, and you got to have that short-term position. And so we like to think we work with the 45% that aren't in the Fidelity study, but occasionally we come across some of the ones that are in the study, and it's a little sad.
And then the dangers of carrying credit card debt because you don't have an emergency fund, that's when we typically start seeing, hey, you're going to end up again budgeting and failing to create an emergency fund. You're going to end up in the position where you're having that credit card debt, which we already talked about. Having high credit utilization can cause your credit score to go down. So can make it harder to get loans and everything in the future. And then not to mention the crippling interest. Once you have that interest that you're paying, it's going to be really hard to build an emergency fund when you're paying 20-30% interest to somebody else. So it's going to be hard to get money, and it's going to be hard to accumulate money because now you're underwater paying somebody else's bills and paying somebody else's rewards points and paying for their vacations because you put it on the credit card, paying that interest. So it's something that you never want to be in the position where you're carrying credit card debt because you just failed to plan. And we always say you don't plan to fail, you fail to plan. And I think that's part of the reason why it's extremely important.
I think Ben Franklin was the one that coined that saying first, and it's been around since I got into the business almost 40 years ago. A couple of the quick things on credit card that I think are fascinating because we talk to a lot of people that think they beat the credit card company at their game. They say, well, I transferred everything to a 0% card for 18 months. And then they're using that card and they're not paying attention to the bottom line that shows that their payments they're making are going to the 0% balance, and the new charges they're making are going into a 24% column that is compounding. So, they say, all right, I'm only spending $300 a month new money. The $30,000 is all at 0%. Guess what? Your $500 a month payments are going to the 0%, and the new charges are going to 25% and accruing. And then the other dirty little secret, it's called revolving debt, because if your billing cycle was the 1st to the 30th, to make it easy, and on the 29th you went in and charged a $5 item, the interest gets billed back. If you have an existing balance, the interest gets billed back to the 1st of the month, 29 days earlier. Whereas if you have a zero balance credit card, you get a bill for the exact amount with no interest if you pay it off on time. And it's a nice clean transaction, but carrying a revolving balance, they have that dirty little secret. So they have two dirty little secrets in there. And these are things that most consumers aren't aware of. And they can't figure out why they can't get out of credit card debt. And then, the other comment here about, I think that's worth saying because we've talked about budgeting and we've talked about credit cards. They're two big ones where the mistakes are made and they ruin relationships. I thought when Amanda and our team did the research for this, I thought that the number one reason for divorce in this country was infidelity. But apparently, according to the research we did for this podcast, it's financial. And, you know, that just knocked me out of my chair that it's a financial issue. High interest rates have a major impact on your financial instability. And then, they cause, hey, why did you buy that? Why are you buying a new jacket? Well, the other one's got holes in it. Well, you could have waited until it was on sale, or you start to fight about and bicker about little things. So let's help you get your ship in order, or if you need to, or if someone needs to. I think it's a big part of what we do in the planning process. Whether you're a multi-millionaire taking out $15,000-$20,000 a month, or whether you're that young kid saving in the 401k, budgeting is important.
Yeah, and I think it's 40 or 50 between 40 and 50% that the divorce, the reason cited for divorce was some sort of financial reason. So it's actually quite staggering, the actual numbers, and it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of stress that could happen if your financial ship is not in order and not sailing smoothly, that passes along to the relationship. So let's talk a little bit, John, about how we can offer strategies to help pay down debt once that debt situation happens. Because we
Yeah.
know we don't want to get into it, but some people here may be already listening and say, man, I'm already in some debt. How do I get out of that?
Yeah, so we look at the credit cards and we come up with an agreement on how you want to do it. There's the snowball method, the avalanche method, and then there's credit consolidation, which I'll leave for you, based on your background and lending experience before 5 years ago when you joined us. The snowball method is I'm going to get rid of the smallest card first. I got $1,000 card, I got a $5,000 card, and I got a $10,000 card. I'm going to spend 2 months focusing on the $1,000 card and then redirect all those payments to the $5,000 card. And then when that one's gone in the end of the year, I'm going to redirect to the $10,000 card. That's the snowball method. The avalanche method sometimes works better in my mind. That's where we look at the one and say, all right, this one's got a 24% rate. This one's got a 13, and this one's at 0 for 6 more or 9 more months or whatever. We want to tackle the 24% rate. And then based on something I said earlier, remember, we don't want to use any of the cards that are carrying balances. So if you say, I need to use a credit card for gasoline and other things going forward, now you need to have a fourth card that you don't carry a balance on it. You pay off every month. So you charge $200, you pay $200 off. There's a 0 revolving balance on that one because you budgeted and you figured out what you can afford to spend on it. And then all payments go to the cards with the balance with no new charges on those cards. So we don't get into the dirty little secrets. And then Taylor, tell us about consolidation and how you
Yeah, so I think the other thing is these credit cards, the interest rates tend to be pretty high. We see an average of 15 to 30% around the credit cards that are out there that we're typically looking at when we're helping with debt pay down strategies. So I think it's important to mention it. It's not a fit for everybody, but there's banks out there that'll give personal loans, or they're deemed debt consolidation loans, where they'll pay off all your debt. They'll put it into one nice loan. Interest rates aren't phenomenal on it, but they're typically better than what you'd be paying on the credit cards. So you can consolidate, get a lower interest, and then have an extended period of time where you can pay that off depending on what loan you actually are approved for. So it's just something to consider that we want to throw out there and make sure everyone knows is out there in case you do get in a pickle and paying it down isn't going as smoothly or as easily as you would have hoped for. So
yeah, good. Now, we're talking about mistakes, and a big part of what we do is pre-retirement, retirement planning and then post-retirement planning, but retirement planning is another area where there's a lot of big mistakes. So tell us about the big three or four, Taylor.
Yeah, so I think the major consequences of overlooking retirement plans first and foremost is that one, you can't retire. You get to the point in your career where you've worked for many, many years and you're falling victim to the do I have enough question and have I saved enough? And I think it goes back to something we talk about a lot on here, which is lifestyle inflation. And I think in lifestyle inflation, it creates this vicious cycle where every time you get a promotion and you're not budgeting and you say, hey, I have more money coming in now, I'm going to spend more, you're now creating a more expensive lifestyle for yourself. And then by having a more expensive lifestyle for yourself, when it comes time to retire, you're not having enough funds saved because your lifestyle increased. It's more expensive now to live in retirement because you've increased your lifestyle at every stage of the game instead of savings. So you now need more funds to live in retirement, but at the same time, you've saved less funds because you've increased your lifestyle. So I think that's a really big consequence of overlooking the retirement planning portion of it. Because if you're planning for retirement and making sure you have what you need and you're saving for it, by saving, you're actually keeping your spending down so it doesn't snowball and become impossible to keep up with when retirement comes around. So I think that's a really big point that we see it with clients that come in and they're hoping we're miracle or prospects more often that are hoping we're miracle workers and saying, hey, I never spoke to a financial advisor my whole life. I'm really hoping that you guys can help me. And I want to retire at age 62. I'll start my social security and I have $100,000 saved up, but I've been spending 300,000 a year because that's what my salary's been. And it's unfortunate because it's so late in the game. There's not a whole lot that we can really do without being miracle workers. Sometimes I think we had an old joke that says you don't need a financial advisor, you need a magician. And it's sometimes how we feel, and we love to help people. So it hurts when we get in that situation where the planning was overlooked all those years and they came to us too late, and it was too late to help them achieve those lofty goals. And we have to start talking with them about the trade-offs and, hey, you might need to work longer, or hey, you might need to live a more frugal lifestyle in retirement.
Yep. And then another mistake is not planning enough for healthcare costs. We often call it the spending smile because it's got the U shape. Beginning of retirement, your spending is high. It starts to go down when you travel less, and it starts to go up toward the end when medical bills come in. There's a lot of studies out there that say 80% of your medical costs are used in the last couple of years of your life. One of the studies says a 65-year-old couple retiring in 2022 can expect to spend 315,000 out of pocket. Out of pocket, that means they have not their total bills, but they have insurances but if you add in what they have to pay for Medicare, Part A, Part B, Part D, supplementals, out of pocket, so it adds up. 315,000 is not a little number. And so where we sit down with people that have, $250,000 and they say, can I retire? Now, if they have a big pension, they can, but that can eat up those medical costs, can destroy you. In-home care costs can be, very high. People say, well, I won't go to a nursing home. I'll get care at home. If that care is advanced and highly skilled, it's going to cost more in your house than it does in a facility. And you can decide, I want to prepay that by buying insurance, which we have a separate podcast for that, and an actual webinar we did with an expert. But you can also decide, I'm just going to self-insure and hope I don't get sick, and hope that I can, go hide out in Switzerland or something and get sick there and get on their system, which will not work. So those are some of the roadblocks. And then there's pitfalls to taking on risk to try to cover that shortfall, Taylor.
Yeah. And I think just kind of pivoting to our last mistake is really just the big one, which happens a lot. And I think it goes back to the whole fear of missing out and human psychology. It makes sense that people see trendy and hot stocks and they try to get in and they try to chase it. And I think that more often than not, people aren't understanding what these companies are, what they do. They just hear a friend say they bought it and say it's doubled the last 2 years for me. You got to get into this thing. This thing is gold. And you hear all of the trendy words and you just are like, man, I'm on the sidelines. I'm missing out on this. And you try to jump in and you're not understanding the risks of the actual investment or even the fundamentals of what the company does or why you would be buying it. So I think that often that's a mistake that especially the younger generations that are kind of trying to chase return more so than anything else and have a more fruitful or earlier retirement, try to really get that excess return and they chase down some of these quote unquote hot stocks that are the next big thing and they end up swinging and missing.
Yeah, it's just triggered in my mind. The other mistake too is, because you mentioned FOMO, it's the Social Security decision, right? Like, I'm going to take it now at 62 because it's going to take me until 80 to break even. You'd be surprised how many 85 and 90-year-olds, I meet that say, boy, my Social Security didn't keep up, even with big increases along the way. It didn't keep up with their needs. So, a lot of times it makes more sense to draw from the portfolio to let that Social Security stack and get bigger because it starts with a bigger number and then all future government COLAs, cost of living adjustments, COLA, are based on that starting amount. So two twins retire at 62. Twin number one turns his Social Security on and gets $2,000 a month. Twin number two uses $2,000 a month from his portfolio because he planned and he turns it on at 70. Now he's getting $4,000 a month, while twin number one is up to maybe 2,700 with inflation. It doesn't take long for twin number two to catch up. Now that said, if either of the twins had a fatal gene or a terminal illness, we certainly understand why they might want to start earlier. But that's a big FOMO trade, we call it, a fear of missing out. That we think is
I think
important.
it's really kind of important to emphasize that Social Security is a very individualized decision. And I think that a lot of people try to pigeonhole and say everyone should take it at 62, start getting your money back from the government now. And then a lot of other people will say you need to wait till the very end, 70, let it grow, let it grow. You're going to outlive that number. And I think it's very individualized, and too many people will swim with the tides, which I think reminds me of going back to my comments about the trendy and high risk stuff. One of my favorite quotes from Warren Buffett that said, it's only when the tide goes out that you see who's been swimming naked. And he just means in the sense that if the people that are just making their decisions without any insight, without any risk, taking into account when the time comes and things are not going great, you're going to see who actually wasn't prepared for that, who didn't account for the decisions ahead of time. So I think taking the risk and understanding the risks are two really different and separated things that are often not realized enough.
Excellent. And that pretty much puts a wrap on it. The three areas we covered lots of mistakes internally in those areas, but the three main areas were the budgeting process, the credit card game, which is linked to budgeting as well, and then the retirement mistakes that people make. And so, without further ado, I hope everyone has a great day. Feel free to share the podcast. There's nothing proprietary in here. It's all generic information. And we look forward to speaking to you and answering any questions you have.
Thanks for joining Financial Tides. We'll see you next time.
John Perillo and Taylor Perillo are financial advisors offering securities through Cetera Advisors LLC, a registered broker-dealer, doing insurance business in California as CFGA Insurance Agency LLC, Member FINRA/SIPC advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera firms are under separate ownerships from any other named entity. California insurance licenses number 0F60123 and 0M90666, 6265 Greenwich Drive, Suite 251, San Diego, California 92122. The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Advisors LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Advisors LLC nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice.